It's 1:32 a.m. Do you know where your children are? Meow. La 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 la. Deconverted man is here to stay. And I am singing once again. Don't sing! Okay, alright, fine. Deconverted man here. So, do you understand the Lobsterist? Well, of course you don't, because you haven't read it. Oh, but also there's now two Lobsterists because things are confusing and I like them that way. For a fun thing, because this guy did taco and it was stupid. It's like the transcendent argument, and then the argument of axiomat, whatever. The one from that's like morals, and then cosmological, and then O's ontological, probably. I don't know. Anyways, it's a little thing that they have to try to be like, oh yes, it demolishes atheism. No, it doesn't. Every single one of the arguments they mention is broken, and their video is annoying, and they're, it's just annoying, and just like, no. So like the tag and all this bullshit, and it's like, yeah, it's nonsense. So I said, yeah, Lobsterist beats your taco. And after I posted that, then Dragon Master commented, and so because he commented, I'm like, all right, cool, yeah, he's gonna debunk me and blow me out of the water. He said, but he doesn't understand Lobsterist, so now I have to explain it to him, I guess. But I'm not gonna be annoying like these guys. So I should show you, you can see that he's here. You can see he said everything, so you know that I'm not just making up this stuff that I'm going to show you, because I'm not going to be using YouTube to do it. I'm going to be using WordPad instead, because I can control WordPad a little bit better than I can YouTube for text stuff. So let's go over what Lobsterist is, not the book, but this thing, and we'll talk about it. So logic. Well, really, this is informal logic. It could be formal, whatever. It's the foundation for reasoning. Okay. Then objectivity. You need an unbiased analysis of claims. You need to attempt to do this, perhaps with the help of others. You and then of course you need to have bias checking, where you recognize that yes, you have a bias, and then you try to minimize your bias. And again, other people might be able to help, and those people ideally should be people that don't necessarily agree with you, or who are agreeing to try to analyze your thing in the most objective manner possible. And of course, science is the evidence-based understanding of reality. We need to do science whenever possible. We need testability. We need to test it. The claim has to be tested, be falsifiable, and it has to be tested in some way, shape, or form. And of course, we have empiricism, where we rely on observable, measurable evidence. Then we use reason, which is critically thinking about things, and we apply that consistently. We have inquiry, which is the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. I'm not sure if I'm happy with inquiry for I, but yeah, I can mess with it later. And of course, skepticism, which is questioning all claims without sufficient evidence, or as I like to put it, holding things in question until you have the data, evidence, etc. And then, of course, truth, the ultimate goal of knowledge seeking. And I'm not really satisfied with T here either, but again, I can change it later. Now, I said I win, and Dragon Master responded, well then, explain how you can disprove God with those things then. So, this was a logical fallacy, multiple of them, but I was kind of in a hurry when I responded. I don't know. Sometimes you don't catch things until later. You think about it, you're like, oh yeah, he screwed up multiple times. So first and foremost, this assumes that the Lobsterist is trying to disprove God. The Lobsterist is a system that you utilize. Whether or not it disproves God, I don't know. It might not. It depends what God is. But if you use the lobsterist system, then we can, on anything, in this case, we're going to use it on God, we'll see where God stands. It might not, in fact, be about proving or disproving. It might actually be about whether or not you should believe there's a God, which is different than proving or disproving any given idea. Because using rationalism is about recognizing that there are truths in the universe that we may never know, and accepting that fact and saying, if it is true, but I can't verify it, then I shouldn't believe it. No matter what emotional reasons you might give, if I can't verify it, I shouldn't believe something just because I want to, or I've been told to, or, I need more. And the lobsterist does that. It unfolds that, okay, when you use the system. So this is a loaded question. Also, now the thing I focused on is this shifts the burden of proof. So he fails on L twice. We'll get into that in his response, but this is his initial statement / question. So here's my response to him initially. The L in logic negates that idea by telling you you're now performing a logical fallacy, shifting the burden of proof. I should have also said you've also failed on L because you didn't use logic. You assumed that the lobsterist is for a thing and it's not. And again, we'll get into that more. But okay. Then using own objectivity, we note there are thousands of God ideas produced by humans, both past and present. And what God is subject to whom you ask. Asking them would, of course, give you the idea they hold. And so objectively, we can say that many people have many ideas of what God is. This means disproving God is impossible until there's an agreement upon what God even is. Some God claims can be dismissed with the L in logic, but it depends upon the claim. So, see, I am performing the lobsterist unlike him. He didn't perform the lobsterist. He thinks that I'm explaining to him how the lobsterist disproves God, and I'm not really. I'm just showing him how he failed to use the lobsterist. Then I said, it seems, that means I could have said, I believe, to have not performed the B in bias checking. I really meant you have not performed the B in bias checking. Perhaps you should do this. I've already done so. Have you? That's a question. It is not an argument. It is asking him if he has checked his bias. Keep that a note. The S in science is silent on the God issue unless you have some peer-reviewed paper about God that you can cite. I'm unaware of any such paper. And again, I'm still responding to, in part, that he wants me to use the lobsterist on God in a way, and so that's what I'm doing. And again, it's not to negate God, it is just using the lobsterist on God and what he said simultaneously. Then, of course, as for testing, which is the T, that depends on what God is. What sort of test could be performed that would show God is not a thing, which is, of course, in the falsifiability part. And then, of course, that depends on what God is claimed to be. If your God cannot be tested, it cannot be proven. Thus, it fails to pass this point. So it would fail the lobsterist if we're using the lobsterist as a system to determine what we should or shouldn't believe in, which is the proper use of it, by the way. Then your God fails if it can't be tested. Then we have to ask if there's any empirical evidence for the E. So is there any empirical evidence for God? I'm not aware of any, but maybe he knows of some. So again, I'm using the lobsterist idea on God, and that's what I'm outlining. Reason. Clearly, you've failed to use this. Okay, that's kind of a slight against him. It's more of a subjective statement on my part than anything. But, I'm jaded. Anyways, the L part in logic already should have shown you this. Well, he didn't. I don't think he used reason when he read my post. I really don't. I think he read my post and was like, yeah, well, that doesn't disprove God, without like thinking about it. Like, that's what I think. That's subjective. I could be wrong on that. So maybe I failed reason. And you know what? Part of being skeptical, or is admitting when you're wrong about how you say things and whatever. So I would revise this to say, reason. What reasoning do you use for God? Well, it depends on what God is. That goes back to what God is. And in order to get a reasoning for God, you have to have used reasoning in the above steps, which you can't even do until you decide what God you're talking about. But because this is just responding to God in this how does lobsterist apply to God statement, or, well, he thinks it's disproving, but of course it's not what it's about. It's just showing him how you apply the lobsterist in God. Then when you get to the reason part, you have to say, what reasoning did I use to determine what God is in the first place? Inquiry. This is up to you, not up to me to do. Have you looked into the matter of God? How? What was your method? What research was performed? Did you look into every God claim or a few? Many questions must be asked and answered by you who is to perform this. And again, I'm telling him, this is how the lobsterist works. The I in inquiry is something you must do that's reading through lobsterist. And how do you use reason when you read the thing that I said ate stupid taco, because lobsters can eat tacos, duh. But if you had thought about it, first of all, you wouldn't have assumed that it's negating or dismissing or disproving God. You wouldn't have assumed anything. You would have asked clarifying questions. Hey, is this meant to disprove God? What is this meant to do? How do I use it? I'm unclear about this or that or something like that. No. How does this disprove God? See, because you're in a binary thinking. It's not about disproving or proving. It's about saying we should hold the idea of God in question and we shouldn't believe in it because it fails our system, in this case, the system of the lobsterist. But you have to do the inquiry. Skepticism. I'm doing it for God. Are you skeptic in regards to God? So I know that I am being a skeptic in regards to God. I know that for sure because I'm me. I'm not him. So I'm asking if he's being skeptical about God. If not, then he fails the S in lobsterist. And then and then with truth, I say, how do you get this? And what is your epistemology? Because that's what we have to ask regarding truth. And then I said, the lobsterist requires you to think rather than to believe. Here's his response to my response. L, logic. I don't even know why you said I was making a logical fallacy when I haven't even made an argument yet. Because you did make a logical fallacy twice. You have a loaded question that assumes that the lobsterist is disproving God, which it isn't. Then you also have switching burden of proof. It isn't up to me to disprove anything, especially when I didn't claim that it wasn't a thing. So by suggesting that the lobsterist can disprove God, you've committed two logical fallacies at once. The burden is upon the one making the claim about God, not on the one that says, I don't believe in God. See, you assume that I say that there is no God, and in doing so acquire other fallacies, perhaps, if you indeed are assuming that. But asking a question or writing a statement can indeed produce a fallacy on its own. You don't need to make an argument to have a logical fallacy. Ironically, use that word wrong, you made logical fallacies in this argument. No, I didn't. because I'm not making an argument. I'm explaining how something works. Well, technically, I guess you could say that's a type of dialogue, which is information exchange. Actually, information and presentation. And he'll state them when they become relevant. No, he'll get them all wrong. And no, the burden of proof does not automatically fall upon me. Yes, it does. If you're claiming there's a God, it certainly does. Period. End of story. The burden of proof falls upon whoever is trying to convince others of something, which I'm not trying to do. I'm trying to defend my belief. Why would you do that? Unless you're trying to defend your belief by convincing me that I'm wrong. The only way you're going to successfully defend anything is to show why that thing is a thing in the first place and why we should think it's a thing. That requires you to have the burden of proof. Clearly, you have failed logic. O, which is the objectivity part. We're not arguing about every concept of God. Well, then you fail the objectivity. You have failed to be objective about God. I thought the video made it clear. And I'm not even talking about the damn video. I don't care about the damn video. Doesn't matter. The O in objectivity requires you to say, wait a minute, just because this video is talking about a certain God, what about all the other gods out there? You have to be objective. You're not doing that. The video isn't doing that. So you're wrong and you fail the objectivity part. We mean Christian Arabic view of God. Yeah, well, which version of that view of God? Because there's plenty of versions of that as well. So you still haven't narrowed it down. And we're comparing the probability of being true when compared to the belief there being no sort of divine being creator. There's no way to figure out the probability of such things. There's zero way to figure that out unless you have a system. You don't have a system, not even a little. I already know that. I just absolutely know for a fact that there is zero chance that you have any methodology of coming up with probability of your God, specifically your God, being correct versus no God being correct. There's no way to do that. And more importantly, it has nothing to do with being objective at all. Because what you're saying is, well, I've determined that my God is real, all the other gods are false, so I don't need to be objective. But then you fail being objective, right? Also, trying to bring into other beliefs into here were not previously mentioned may cause a slippery slope argument. Okay, so no, it's not a slippery slope argument. You don't appear to know what a slippery slope argument is. That would be if I had said, if one starts believing in the Judeo-Christian God, next thing you know, they'll be out protesting homosexual marriage and protesting at somebody's funeral that died that is suspected of being a homosexual, which we've known them to do. But that is not what is going on when we are objective about admitting the fact that there are multiple God ideas. That is not a slippery slope argument. It is being objective. Learn logic. You don't know what the hell a slippery slope argument is. You fail logic again. You're comparing the probability of Christianity and atheism being true. There's no way to do that. You have no methodology there. And also, atheism being true doesn't make any goddamn sense. You don't understand what the word atheist means. Atheism being true doesn't make even a little sense. Clearly, you need to know what the word atheist means. You don't. I don't know why I should tell him. I'll let him figure it out. B, which is the what is B in Lobsterist? Now I'm gonna have to look up what the hell Lobsterist is. See, even I don't remember my own thing, but it's okay because when I do it, it's fine. Bias. bias? Yes. See, I knew I would get it. By claiming that I had not checked for any bias in my argument, did I claim that? No, I did not claim that. I asked you if you had. That is not claiming that you haven't. That is asking you a question. Stop failing at basic logic and understanding of words. You're making a baseless assumption. Quite hypocritical, if I do say so myself. Hypocritical isn't part of the Lobsterist, so that wouldn't be relevant even if it was true. I'm explaining to you how the Lobsterist works. You're ignoring that. Also, unless you get someone with a different view to you to agree, you cannot remove the possibility of unconscious bias. Exactly. So, have you done that? Yes or no? I don't know. Answer the question. Everyone has internal biases, including you and I, and they can affect us if we notice them or not. I know that. That's why it says bias. See, it's in there so that you remember that it's a thing that you need to be aware of and that you check your biases. I asked you if you did. You didn't answer the question. No, I don't act like I have complete lack of bias at all, not even a little. My statements regarding how the Lobsterist works and functions is not bias. It's merely explaining how the Lobsterist functions, which you don't get. You think it's about negating God, but it's not. That's just ridiculously silly. But whatever, it makes a good video, so I'm going to keep going. S. This is the S in science. The fact that you're saying science has not proven God, therefore God does not exist, is not what I said even a little. Did you read what I said? Did you even read what the hell I said in my original post? Because I don't know that you did. I'm thinking maybe you kind of skimmed over it just a little. Because I did not say that. Not even close. Okay? What I said, or rather what I wrote, is that science is silent on the God issue. Unless you have some peer-reviewed paper about God that you could cite, because I don't know of any such paper. So I'm not saying that science disproves God, you utter nitwit nincompoop. Read what was written. Think about it. Okay? Yeah, think a little bit. Just little. Man, goodness gracious. No, I did not say that science has not proven God. It's silent on the God issue. And I'm not saying, therefore, God does not exist. I'm not saying anything other than science is silent on the issue unless you know of a scientific thing. If science is silent on it, then guess what? It fails to pass the science part of Lobsterist. If God doesn't appear in science, then whether or not God is real is irrelevant because it can't make it past the essence science of the Lobsterist, which is why I win with the Lobsterist. Shows a lack of both the concept of understanding of both the concept and science and God. Well, what is God? I don't know. How do you know that God isn't scientific? Couldn't there be a peer-reviewed paper talking about God? There are many, but to prove that or disprove God or use, no, come on. Science explains our universe, not what's outside of it. Well, science explains some of our universe. Whether there is or isn't an outside of it would be outside of science, wouldn't it? So you couldn't use the essence science on that. Therefore, anything outside of the universe would fail and not get past the essence science part of Lobsterist. Science cannot explain the divine or supernatural. Okay, but those aren't things in science. How do you? But I would also ask, how do you know that this is not of our universe, that it's outside of our universe? How do you know that? You've asserted it, but you need to demonstrate it. So no, I don't need a peer-reviewed study that proves God exists. It'd be nice to have, though, wouldn't it? But I guess you're agreeing with me that there isn't any. So you do agree that science is silent on the subject of God. Therefore, God doesn't pass the S of science in Lobsterist. Therefore, the Lobsterist beats God. There is no test we can prove that there is or isn't God. And that does disprove God's existence. Well, actually, it kind of does disprove certain types of gods. If there isn't a test that cannot be done to falsify it, that's a problem. That means it's unscientific, and that means it doesn't pass the S in science of the Lobsterist. But also, depending on what version of God you have, there is indeed a test you can do that would prove or disprove God's existence. Now I know you have problems understanding questions and you think that they're statements, so I'm going to be very careful with this. Is God always the same to yesterday, today, and tomorrow? I used to hear that a lot in church, that God was the same. I don't know if you believe that or not. So do you think God is always the same? God does not change, personality, or like demands, or permit, how do you agree with this idea that God is always the same? If you say no, then the rest of what I'm going to say doesn't matter. Okay? If you say no, God's not always the same, God can change. God, in the Bible, God was mad, but the guy can't talk to God, and then God seemed to calm down. So clearly, God can change. But if you think, well, so it's either a yes or it's a no. Either God can change sometimes, or God can not change at all, and any appearance of God changing is just us being wrong about God. So like God gets upset at somebody, then, or seems to be upset, and the guy goes to talk to God, and then God seems to calm down. But that's not really God changing at all. That's just all an act that God's putting on for the guy's benefit or something like that. I don't, I'm not pretending to understand deep theology questions. These are up to you to answer. Okay. So if you think God is always the same, then we can proceed with a test about a God. Oh, we should say what God we're talking about of the Bible, right? Of the Judeo-Christian Bible, as you reference, right? Because you want to be Pacific, and so do I. So I want to outline that there is indeed a test that we can do if you think God is always the same. That is to say that maybe the emotional elements are changeable or flexible to some degree, but broadly speaking, God's the same sort of God. Okay? If you think that God does not change, then there is a test we can do. All right? Because there's actually a test of God versus Baal in the Bible. This happens in 1 Kings 18:20-40. And it's a long, lengthy story. But basically, the Baal believers have a altar set up to Baal, and the Yahweh followers have an altar set up to Yahweh, and the Baal people pray, and nothing happens, and then the Yahweh people pray, and their thing lights on fire immediately, and then they proceed to kill the Baal people anyways, because not only did they prove they were right, but they needed to kill them, just to make sure, I guess. I don't know. But if God is always the same, then we can do the test of Baal versus Yahweh today. Can we do that test? And if so, will the fire for Yahweh light up? The expected outcome would be that the altar for Yahweh would go be on fire. That it would illuminate. That they would torch itself. It would without any intervention of the humans, it would be on fire. That should be the outcome. But if we do this test and diddly squat happens on the Yahweh side, then that must mean that the idea of Yahweh is not true. So then Yahweh does change. And that explains why we can't test God today. And you might say, yeah, exactly. You can't test God. But if God does change, how can we trust God? See the predicament there? So either we can perform the experiment and we'll see it light up in flames, or we can't perform the experiment, which means God does change, which means we can't trust God. And at the very least, we negated a God that doesn't change. So we negated one version of God, didn't we? Stop trying to say we need science to prove God. You just look stupid. No, that's you, not me. But we need to use science on the things that the lobsterist is being applied to. Otherwise, you're not applying the lobsterist to it. So when you use the lobsterist, and I know this might be difficult to comprehend, you actually have to use the lobsterist. Use it, So if you don't want to use science, then you're not going to use the lobsterist. So if you say God can't be science done with of whatever, then God fails to pass the lobster. Okay? Got it? T, as I said, you can't test God because it's a higher plane of existence. How do you know what God is since you can't test it? How do you know that God is on a higher plane of existence? How do you know that? How the hell do you know that? All we could see is past claims about unnatural events. No, we can't see, and we can see claims have been made, but we can't see these unnatural events. So, do you have an example of an unnatural event that we can see today and that we can test today? If not, it fails the T part of testing and we discard it. And then that questions everything we know about science, if there was indeed supernatural stuff. I don't know that it would make us question everything that we know about science, but it certainly would be interesting. But you don't have it to test, so it doesn't matter. Discard it. If those things happen, whether or not they support God's existence would require additional testing. That's out the window because you said God can't be tested, so we discard that. I don't have all the time to argue about the reliability of the Bible. Then the Bible is discarded because you don't want to support it. All I can say is that research I did in my short life, I believe it's reasonable, or reliable. Well, what research did you do? I asked you that question and you didn't answer it. Empirical. So again, you can't run tests to prove God, or so then there is no, then God fails empirically. Okay, you don't understand what empirical is, and you're saying that God isn't that thing, so then we discard God. Got research the teleological and cosmological arguments mentioned in the video. I have. They both suck on logical and scientific levels. They have multiple logical fallacies and scientific errors and assumptions in them. So guess what? They failed the logic part in Lobsterist, so we discard it. I believe they both support the existence of God. Well, that's your problem. You believe, you haven't done the Lobsterist. I don't know how I showed a lack of reason in our argument. Well, you're showing a lack of reason by not reading what I wrote and assuming things that I said when I didn't say. You assume that I'm saying that science disproves God. I didn't say it. You're saying that I said things that I didn't say. That is unreasonable. In fact, you're automatically assuming that I lack reason off nothing shows you're a hypocrite and super biased. I'm not assuming anything. You're assuming that I'm assuming. Stop doing that. But are you using reason? Because you haven't told me anything yet. So I'm saying that you fail on the reason part of Lobsterist. What was I again? I forgot what I was. Inquiry. Oh, all right. Inquiry. I'm not going to tell you every reason I have for believing that God exists. Why not? Here's a simple thing. Okay, I'm very simple. Okay. I'll tell you why I don't believe that God exists. It failed to pass the lobster. That's one reason I could say that I don't believe in God. It failed to pass the Lobsterist. There you go. That was pretty simple for me to do. Shouldn't be that hard. But I could also go simpler. There's no way to test God, so there's no way to verify it. Oh, that's in the Lobsterist, right? Everything that I'm going to say of why I don't believe in God is in the Lobsterist. I don't care why you believe. I want you to demonstrate what you believe is true. Yeah, you believe stuff. Okay, great. Now demonstrate that that stuff is true. And if you don't tell me, it's not about telling me the reasons. It's about, have you looked? Have you inquired into it? Yes or no? That's it. If you have, great. If you haven't, maybe you need to do that. I don't think you really have, though. And that I promise you, it's not blind faith. It is, actually. Christianity is blind faith. It absolutely is. But I suppose you've been conditioned to believe it's not through bad apologetics. But I'm here to tell you, Christianity has always been about blind faith. It even encourages it in the Bible. There's no evidence that Jesus, the person depicted in the Bible, did any of the things that he depicted doing. None. Zero. You have people saying that there was a guy that was named Jesus that did stuff. That's it. That's not evidence. That's a myth. You have a myth. You don't have history. You have people that believe stuff. That's called mythology. So you don't have evidence for any of these things. It is blind. I have reasons from research. I doubt it. What research? Logic, no, you don't. You didn't understand logic, so I don't believe you there. And personal experience, which doesn't count for diddly squat. So we discard that. It's not in Lobsterist anyway, so you didn't do decent inquiry, and you failed the eye of Lobsterist. Yes, did have multiple phases of skepticism, which brought me right back to where I started. Then you failed the S in skepticism. Because skepticism is about consistently and always questioning the ideas that you think are true. You don't go back to the idea that you started with. You critique it until you've dissembled every single part of it. You're not a skeptic in regards to God. You believe in God. That's the opposite of being a skeptic about God. So you fail the essence in Lobsterist. I want to ask you something. Have you shown an equal amount of skepticism about all claims? Yes, I have. Were you skeptical of both Christianity and atheism? You don't understand what atheism is. Again, I'm going to let you figure it out on your own and not tell you. Did you question both the Bible? Absolutely, I did. That's why I don't believe it anymore. And the people claiming it's false, actually, I didn't rely on any one person to say that it was false. I simply investigated the archaeological evidence that would have supported the Bible had it been there, and it wasn't there, so I stopped believing. In part because of that. But there was other things too, like learning logic. If not, you're a hypocrite. Doesn't matter, not part of the Lobsterist. And then the T was the truth. I'm not telling you my life story just for the argument. I didn't ask for your life story. I asked you what your epistemology is. All I would say is that I do not believe in God off of blind faith. Yes, you absolutely do believe in God off of blind faith, and you didn't rebuttal my arguments at all. And the Lobsterist rebuttals all of everything that you said. And their stupid taco is destroyed by the L in logic and Lobsterist, so I don't need to rebuttal their video particularly. But if you want an examination of the arguments, I'm certainly, give me those arguments and I'll analyze them. The problem is, dragonmaster2206, that in order for you to understand my criticisms of the argumentations, you need to understand informal logic. So, if you got to this point, there's one question and only one question that really matters. Do you understand informal logic? Or perhaps I should say, have you studied informal logic and also understand it? I don't think you have. You didn't even get what a slippery slope is correct. Yes, you can learn about what the fallacies are, but unless you understand the underlying mechanics of informal logic, including how to make a syllogism and how to analyze it, you will not even understand the critiques that I have about the arguments offered by apologists. And this is the reoccurring problem. The apologist is lying to you. They are out to make a living off of lies. They really are. They are lying to you that these arguments are good arguments. They're not. They've all been debunked. Not just by me, but by plenty of others. Plenty of others have debunked every single one of these arguments that has ever been made. But what you do is you choose not to believe those debunkings of the arguments and just choose to ignore them and keep making the same arguments anyways, and that's all apologists ever do. These are old arguments. All the arguments for God have been around for a long, long time, and none of them have worked ever. And the reason that none of these arguments work is because they're logically flawed. And nowadays, we can say that many, if not all of them, are scientifically flawed. And for my method of Lobsterist, they fail on every single letter of the Lobsterist, and you did as well, dragonmaster2206. But thanks for posting and giving me content to do. Until next time, be skeptical of things, and then after that, stay skeptical.